Hi there, I'm Elizabeth with Ellie's Handcrafted Jewelry, and welcome to my channel where I share tips, tricks, and tutorials for those looking to learn the art of wire wrapping and wire weaving. And today I'm going to be showing you how to create this Autumn Grace hairpin slash brooch slash scarf pin. I tried to make this design as versatile as possible, as I know this time of year people are really starting to think about fall and want to wear their scarves, want to wear brooches, or want to put their hair up. You can create this piece with or without beads. It's that versatile. So you can create pieces that are just woven as well as pieces that are bedazzled a little bit. But before we jump into the video, let's hear from our sponsor, Kazdance.
Before we get started, I'd like to thank Kazdance for sponsoring this video. Kazdance is a gem seller located in the United States and has a variety of high-quality stones. Search by gemstone, shape, size, quality, and more to find the perfect stone for your project. I've left a link in the description below to their website as well as their Facebook page so that you can stay up to date on any new arrivals or sales. Alright, for tools and materials, you're going to need chain nose pliers, round nose pliers, and flush cutters. You may also need some bolt cutters or some kind of heavier cutters for your 12 gauge wire. This is what I got, I think, from the hardware store. It works really well. Additional tools, you'll also need a ruler and also a chasing hammer and a steel bench block or an anvil. You also need something round. This is a dapping block or a dapper, and this is about 27 millimeters around. You may also need a needle file, something like this one. I'll leave some links below as to where I get a lot of these tools, and if you have any questions, you can always reach out. Last but not least, you'll probably need some sanding pads, just kind of help mark out any tool marks and just get a nice finish on your piece. For materials, you're going to need 2 segments of 12 gauge wire. This segment is 8 inches long, and this segment is 5 inches long. So the longer segment will be for the hairpiece, and this will be for the pin. And you're also going to need probably about 2 feet of 24 gauge wire. If you're wanting to add beads, I have these pretty 3mm pyrite from Kazdance, as well as this Briolette. I'm doing red this time. The other one I did kind of a smoky quartz looking one. I thought it was really pretty. So I have my steel bench block here. I'm taking this 8-inch segment of 12 gauge wire, straighten it out just a tad. I'm going to grab my chasing hammer, and I'm going to drop and drag to spread out this wire and to flatten it. I highly recommend wearing earplugs when you do this, as it can be really hard on the ears. But I'll turn down the volume for you guys so you don't have to bear with it. So let's go ahead and get started. You can see I've flattened it here, but there is a little bit of a sharp edge. So that's when I'm going to grab my needle file and I'm going to file that off. If you don't have a needle file though, you can use some really coarse sandpaper, and that will also help get rid of that edge. Now that I got that file down a lot nicer and it's not so sharp, I'm going to grab my round nose pliers and I'm going to create a swirl at the end here. And this is going to be hard because this is hammered wire, so just take your time and just make sure that you have some decent quality pliers for this or something heavy duty. And once you get it about there, I might adjust that a little bit. So about there, I'm going to grab my ruler again. And I'm going to it on the ruler and find my chain nose pliers. So the swirl end is right at the 0 and the 3 inches is there. And take it and just right above that 3-inch mark, I'm going to bend it in half. Now if you get it there, that's okay. You can also stick it on your bench block and you can hammer the top so it collapses it more. So ready? Just like that. And that's going to give us a more defined point. From there I'm going to open it up. So it gives us a little bit more of a point. At this point, I'm going to grab my round object. So stick it in here. Bend this over and bend that over. We want it to be, we actually want the swirl to be over here because the pin is going to go through here and out this side. Kind of have our leafy shape. Now I'm going to grab my chain nose pliers if I can find them. And right where it meets with that wire, I'm going to hit inward towards the inside of the leaf. Back up a little bit so it sharpens the angle. By the way, I have a blog article about using sharp angles and how to create different types of angles. I'll leave a link below to where you can find that. That's about where we're at. Bend that in a little bit more. Something like that. Now I'm going to flatten this end just like I did this swirl. And we're going to swirl that inward. And to do that, I'm just going to bend this out away from the actual frame itself. Place it on my bench block. And we're going to flatten this part up. So now that it's flattened, I'm going to grab my file again and file off the sharp edge. And now, just like before, I'm going to swirl this inward this way. Creating a curve at the end, slowly working my way over. Just remember this wire is hardened because we hammered it. It's going to be a little bit more difficult to curve. Once we get a nice curve on it, I'm going to turn it inward. Just fixing that a little bit so it curves in like that. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more dimension to the piece. I'm going to grab my anvil again, right there, and you can fold this out again, gently, turn it over, and I'm just going to hammer the outside of the swirl. Just be careful not to hit the flattened part, otherwise it'll make it look kind of silly. So here we go. Bring the swirl back in a little bit. Just be careful when you do that. Sometimes I've pinched my fingers more than many times. Now I'm going to hammer the outside of the leaf and the other swirl. Setting it on my steel bench block and hammering away. This is definitely a great way to get your aggressions out. Now that we have our leaf shape, I'm going to do some final adjustments here before we start our weaving. Now I'm going to flip this over. And you can do one of two things. You can use your chasing hammer to flatten it this way, but I am going to use my rubber mallet or my nylon mallet. This is going to help me curve the wire so you can see that this has a slight curve in it, so that way you can get hair or fabric underneath it. So I'm going to do the same thing with this, and the way I do it is I lay it down and I lay it kind of at an angle. You can see I'm pulling up just gently. You can give it as little or as much curve as you'd like it. Alright, so now that I've finished shaping it and giving it dimension, you can see there's tool marks all over the place, and we don't want that. That's where these come in, and these are sanding pads, and I usually go from 600 to 3000 grit. So we'll start with 600, then 1000, then 2000, then 3000. And we're just gonna go over it and buff it out until it's all cleaned up. And the thing I like about these sanding pads is there's a lot of give in the foam, so it makes it a lot easier to kind of hold on to and really reaches a lot of places. Now onto the 1000 grit. You can see it's after being sanded, it looks much better and you don't see any of the tool marks. So now we can move on to weaving. All right, so I have a little over 2 feet of my 24 gauge wire. And the way I'm going to start my weave is by wrapping it around this base of the leaf 3 times. Just like that. And I'm going to bring it underneath this piece here. Pull it through. And I'm going to wrap around it 2 times. And then I'm going to wrap around this side 3 times. You can see I'm feeding it through and then pulling it through. With these thicker gauges, it's a little easier to do. At this point, at the third one, you can bring it underneath again and wrap around 2 times. And scrunch your weave a little bit. 3 times. and then under 2 times. And we're just going to do that a couple more times until we reach about here, and then we can start adding beads if you'd like. Otherwise, you don't have to. All right, so when I've made it about here, if you'd like, you can go ahead and start adding beads. I'm just going to feed that on to my wire. Goes. All right, and then just continue doing the figure 8 weave. Just adding beads as you go. And you can increase the amount of times you wrap around this as well, so you keep it a little bit more even. So you can notice I'm putting beads on as I'm wrapping around this one. So I'm going to grab my bead again, string it on. You can get really clever and start adding more beads too as you go. One more time, get a little more space for my bead. Bead strung on, so wrapping it again. And just keep wrapping and adding beads until you reach about here. Once I've reached about here with all my beads, I'm just going to go ahead and start finishing off the figure 8 weave. So I'm going to weave without a couple beads a couple times to finish it off. Just wrap around at least 3 times, 4 just for good measure. Finish the weave. Now I'm going to trim off the wire about here and do the same with the tail piece. I'm going to trim it off in here. And I'm going to grab my chain nose pliers and tuck those in. There's our hair piece. Now we just need to create the pin. So to create the pin, we're basically going to create another swirl, but we'll make sure that it's a closed swirl, so that way we can put on our little decorative piece if we want to. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I kind of like it for brooches and scarf pins. So we're going to do that by grabbing our 5-inch segment of 12 gauge wire. I'm going to stick this here, and I'm going to hammer the end flat, and then we're going to swirl it. And this time I wanted to see if I hammered it and curved at the same time, it actually kind of helps start the curve for you too. So now that we got it curved, I'm going to grab my file and we're going to file that sharp end down. Just like that. Grab my round nose pliers. Start curving that in. Now if it's a little hard there, I'm going to grab my flat nose pliers. Squeeze that in a little bit. You can also do this with chain nose pliers. This is just a little safer. Like so. And we're just going to continue rounding that out. Still a little oblong. About something like that. Now I'm going to grab my bench block for the last time and my chasing hammer, and I'm just going to add a little dimension outside, on the outside of the swirl. Just make sure you don't hit that thin part if you can help it. So there's the added dimension. And I'm going to grab my sandpaper, starting with 600 through 3000 to give this a nice polish and shine, and also take out the hammer marks. And just sand all of it down. You're also going to want to sand this down, and before I do that, I'm going to grab my file and knock off the sharp end here. All right, so now I'm going to stick that on my, stick the pad down. Just run that back and forth and around, rotating as I go. So this will create a nice dull point on the end. So here is the hairpin. I forgot to mention to check it and make sure that it goes through the little loop here and out the side. When I checked it, it was a little too long. So either I didn't make my swirl big enough, or 5 inches was just too long for this piece. But it's okay. You can trim it down and then just soften the end. Now let's go to adding our little decorative piece. Got 3 pyrite beads here, and I got my little Briolette, and I'm going to grab my 24 gauge wire, start stringing these on, and create a chain. I'm going to start by grabbing my round nose pliers, turn this over, and then I'm going to create a little bit of a bigger loop on top so I can put that on my hairpin. And grab my chain nose pliers, hold that loop in place while I wrap it around a couple times. I'll actually wrap it around 3 times. Trim off the excess wire. There's my little loop. Bring this back up. A little bead. Grab my round nose pliers, tip this over. Just at the tip of my pliers, so that should be just enough for about 3 wraps. Then making a smaller loop. Bring this around. Now I'm going to grab my chain nose pliers, hold that loop in place, and wrap it around a couple times. And then I'm just going to wrap around the bead on the way down and secure it there. Trim off the excess wire and tuck it in. So there's one little link, and we're going to add a couple more. So I'm going to grab my little bead and feed it on. This time I'm going to create a little loop. Don't finish it just yet. Grab this, and through the little loop at the end, feed this on. Then I'm going to grab my chain nose pliers, hold that in place, and then wrap that around 3 times. You can also use bigger beads. They don't have to be 3mm beads. Trimming that off. Tucking that in. feeding my bead up against it again. Grab my round nose pliers, tipping it over just slightly, creating another loop, holding with my chain nose pliers and then wrapping around, and then down and around the other side. Trim off the excess and tuck in with the pliers. And do that one more time with the final bead. Making sure not to go through this loop, but through the littler loop. Hold with chain nose pliers and wrap around 3 times. Trim off the excess. Scooting up our little bead and then creating the final loop. And down and around to the bottom. And tucking it in. So there's our little chain. Now we need to add the Briolette. And to do that, I'm going to string this onto my 4-gauge wire. Like so. And I'm going to create a little loop on one end. So, bring it over, grabbing my chain nose pliers and creating my loop just like I did with the beads. Trimming that off with my chain nose or flush cutters, tucking that in just a tad. Now I'm going to bring it over and I'm going to guesstimate. So I'm going to bend this up. Something like that, so it's sitting on top of the bead. And bend this over. Then wrap this around. And carefully just wrapping around the top of the Briolette. Now, depending on the style you want to go for, you could leave it just like that. Or you can do what I did with this one and create almost like a bead cap. I'll show you how to do that. So I'm just going to continue wrapping carefully. You can see I'm not applying a lot of pressure, just carefully guiding the wire over the top. And I can apply a little bit more pressure as I move down the bead because now it'll hold it, basically holding the top of the teardrop. It makes it a little easier for me. So I'm just going to keep wrapping down and around until basically I cover the holes. Now when I get down to about where I want it, I'm going to bring this up just like this and around the top. Then I'm going to trim this off and tuck it in. And that's how you do that. But I realized I did something wrong here. I forgot to attach it to the chain before I continued wrapping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my little chain and I'm going to cut off this little bead here, and we'll reattach on both sides. So I'll show you how to do that. Trimming that off. To the side, grab another little bead, and now we're going to attach both sides. So come around those pliers and create a little loop. Oh, oh yeah, you can do it this way. All right, create a little loop. Bead on the smaller loop, not the bigger loop. Then grab your chain nose pliers and wrap it around. And trim. And then we're going to press that. Now at this point, I'm going to take probably at least 2 inches. Trim that off, string on my bead. This will give me plenty of room to work. So if you ever make an oops like I just did, you can fix it really easily. So bending it over, creating a little loop. But before completing the loop, bead on your Briolette. Grab your chain nose pliers. Around, and then up and around. And just trim off the excess and tuck it in. So there's your little decorative piece. Now to get it on, I'm going to open this up a little bit. I'm going to feed this over the bar like that. And close the loop. So it can't get out again. And there you have your hairpin / scarf pin / brooch.
And I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions at all, go ahead and leave them in the comment section below as I try to get to them as quickly as I can. And also just a heads up about a new tutorial that has just hit the store. So it is available for sale on my website. It is a PDF download. And if you are part of the Artisan Tutorial Vault, you already have access to this awesome tutorial. If you want to learn more about the Artisan Tutorial Vault, I have left a link in the description below, as well as to the new course and the free newsletter in which I keep you up to date on everything going on behind the scenes. And until next time, happy weaving!